Thank you very much, Carolyn. Building on your summary statement, this driver yield compliance metric is an optional metric for your use in reporting on your ATP projects or for use on your projects if you consider crossing interventions and crossing improvements as part of your primary objectives in the places where you work. This metric was chosen as a metric important for documenting safety because pedestrian and bicyclist safety relies on the cooperation of drivers to look, legally stop, and yield to people using crosswalks. Measuring yield rates helps us understand how roadway characteristics, vehicle speeds, and pedestrian attributes or behavior may impact whether drivers yield at all. And finally, measuring yield rates before and after implementation of crosswalk enhancements is a way of documenting the safety benefits of making those changes. So we see in this training will provide a standard method to measure drivers yielding to people walking and bicycling. Teams of at least 2 people conduct staged pedestrian crossings for this metric. We want to go over the guidance we have developed in the Excel spreadsheets we've created to standardize the way agencies can document driver yield. Every project, though, will vary. So if every detail doesn't apply to your project, you'll use your best judgment. And also, we're available to you as a resource if you have any questions. As an example, you can today we're going to be talking about pedestrian drivers yielding to pedestrians, but it might be the case that bicycle crossings are a key objective of your project, and so this form is easily modified for that in the format as well. As with the other performance metrics we are developing, we've included written instructions and a tool. A screenshot of the instructions and the tool are provided on this slide. Additional materials besides the documents are clipboards, pencils, a stopwatch, safety cones or chalk, measuring tape, and a walking wheel. And on a scale of 1 to 5 for difficulty of effort, we consider this a 4 mainly because of the setup and staff time commitment to collect the data. This diagram in the instruction sheet illustrates an overview of the steps we will be describing, including preparing for data collection, how to start a crossing to initiate an observation opportunity, and where to record the interaction among the staged pedestrian and the drivers. So first, we want to talk about preparing for the data collection. Firstly, get proper approval from the people from whom you report in your workplace. Secondly, schedule a data collection day and time. We recommend clear weather conditions and daylight for safety reasons, and between 9 a.m. and 3:30 p.m. or outside of school arrival time and dismissal times for free flow conditions of motor vehicle traffic. Read the full instructions on the driver yield compliance tool, which we've provided, or we will provide after this webinar, and collect the supplies mentioned earlier and in the instructions. Assess the site via aerial photos or observation. We want you to get familiar with the site where the data collection is going to be taking. And sometimes the aerial photos are insufficient for that. Make a diagram like the one we have on the left on the clipboard on the right, which illustrates the for the data entry and for data collectors and the pedestrian decoy, what the nature of the location is. And then print the safe crossing protocol and the data collection sheets. For the lane, this is a protocol that's applicable for single lane yielding and multiple lane yieldings. And so you can use a numbering protocol that works for you. You can see in our drawing that we numbered the lanes closest to the curb lane 1, but if you're compliant with the incident management system protocol, you would number the lanes closer to the center line as lane, or the far left lane as lane 1. But what's most important is that everybody involved in the data collection is aware of the lane assignments and collecting the same set of observations per lane. So how do we prepare the site? We mark the dilemma zone using cones that are visible to both the decoy and pedestrian decoy who will be making staged crossings and the observer. The dilemma zone is a concept used in law enforcement and signal timing operations across our practice. and it's the location to demarcate a point on the street after which a driver would not have sufficient time or distance to safely yield the right of way. The dilemma zone takes into account driver reaction time, safe deceleration rates, the posted speed, and the grade. A cone is placed at the far edge of the dilemma zone, which is the upper right-hand corner of our trapezoid in this diagram. So the recorder and the stage pedestrian both can easily see when a car is far enough away to be able to stop safely when a crossing is initiated. After marking the far edge of the dilemma zone with a cone, in a 30-mile-per-hour condition, we would mark 10 feet and which is varies depending upon the speed limit. It's at 110 feet for 25 miles per hour, 140 feet for 30 miles per hour, 183 feet for 35 miles per hour, and 234 feet for 40 miles per hour. The other cones are placed at a standard distance for each of those speeds at 10 feet from the leading edge of the marked crosswalk and 40 feet distances. And these are marked with additional cones or spray chalk paint on the curbside so the recorder can see them easily. This is a further example of a setup that you would do. You can see we've set this street up for 30 miles per hour. Sorry, I'm having a cat problem here. In this case, we use 4 cones to show the dilemma zone. The cone close to show the dilemma zone, as well as the other cones out within the dilemma zone. The cone closest to the decoy is at 0. That's an optional cone. The cone from there, the cones demarcate the 10, 40 feet, and 140 feet. Chalk paint can also be used instead of cones, as long as the recorder can easily see the markings. Our findings when we use the cones is that they have no impact on the driver yield compliance, that drivers pass plenty of cones. They're not set up in a way that they're intended to be for traffic management or anything. So we do recommend using cones because they're more visible for the observer. And just to point out on this slide that the furthest away cone was easily seen in the field, but not so easily seen in our photo. And so we want to make sure that we review the safe crossing protocol in this metric. We do stage each pedestrian crossing. We train the decoy or stage pedestrian to keep their safety paramount. We ask that these instructions, which are both taped on the back of our clipboard but also printed here on the screen, are read out loud to really take in the importance of being safe taking safety into your own hands during this training or during this data collection period. So always stay alert and be aware of traffic from all sides and all lanes. If there's something that's distracting you, wait, take a break, come back to the data collection later. Do not put yourself in an unsafe situation. Always ensure that the oncoming vehicle is clearly yielding and has come to a stop before proceeding to make a crossing. Watch the tires to make sure a car that looks like it is going to stop is actually not moving any further, even if you have obtained eye contact or away from the driver. Use clear body language to continue the crossing that signals to drivers that you intend to cross in front of them. Always pause before the lane line when passing from one lane into another to make sure the next lane is clear if it's a multi-lane crossing. And above all, do not attempt to cross if it cannot be done safely. It's perfectly fine to decide that the situation is the speeds are too high or the visibility is insufficient and pick another location to do the data collection or another metric. And so this set of instructions is about signaling the intent to cross. So under the California Vehicle Code, pedestrian signals their intent to cross the street by placing their foot on the crosswalk at the grade that people are driving on. So when a vehicle is approaching the dilemma zone from the same side of the street you're on, place 1 foot off the curb and into the crosswalk. If there's on-street parking close to that crosswalk, you'll need to step out. You might need to step out to the edge of parked cars so as to have shared visibility among you and drivers. It's important, some important points about this protocol of signaling the intent to cross is that the dilemma zone is marked to ensure a safe stopping distance for vehicles traveling at the posted speed. It should initiate a stage crossing when a car is near the furthest cone and only after the dilemma zone itself has no vehicles in it. Do not take additional steps until after that first one, until a vehicle yields or a sufficient gap presents itself. If the vehicles that's coming into the dilemma zone is traveling at an excessive speed or too close to the curb face or parking lane, the stage pedestrian steps back as the vehicle approaches. Again, keep your safety as paramount. If the vehicle makes no attempt to stop, do not proceed to cross. The recorder will count the number of vehicles passing until you can proceed. And so once you have initiated your intent to, your signal that is your intent to cross the street, you will, as a stage pedestrian, look upstream. If a vehicle clearly begins to yield and the next lane is free, begin your lane crossing. You may wave to the first yielding vehicle to give a bigger signal of your intention to cross. If you see a vehicle rapidly approaching the stopped vehicle in the same lane, ensure it comes to a safe stop before proceeding into the lane of the stopped vehicle. On roads with more than one lane in each direction, always stop at the lane line outside of the path of coming vehicles and make sure the next lane is clear to begin crossing. Stopping at the lane line is essential to prevent the possibility of being involved in a multiple threat crash. Simply looking without stopping is not enough because you have limited reaction time. And if crossing at a normal speed, you'll not be able to react in time. So get into the habit of making a brief stop, even if the lane in the second car yields further back, and in either lane yields further back. If the vehicle yields in the next lane, wave to the vehicle and proceed to the center line or median. If that vehicle is inside the dilemma zone, the recorder will score that driver as yielding. If they do not yield, then mark them as not yielding. Wait for, and at that point, the data collection, the pedestrian's job is done. The stage pedestrian's job is done. Continue to cross across the street. The observer will not be collecting additional data about the traffic coming from the other direction. So wait for a gap in traffic from the opposite direction and continuing crossing the street when it's safe to do so. When a gap appears in the traffic and all cars are outside the dilemma zone and traveling at normal speeds, return to the starting location. In other words, we're collecting all the data from one side of the street where the cones are. Continue to use your judgment and to cross safely and to ensure no vehicles approaching the crosswalk are speeding before stepping out into the lane to return to the starting point. So now we're going to turn to the job of the recorder. The recorder documents interactions of the stage pedestrian and drivers approaching them from the same side of the street using the stage crossing form. And they record this: the number of cars failing to stop by lane, where the crossing includes multiple lanes, the number of cars stopping by lane, where the crossing includes multiple lanes, and by stopping distance, or the location that they stop. And the third thing that is recorded is the time elapsed from the time the stage pedestrian steps into the crosswalk, signaling their intent to cross, and when the crossing is able to commence, because there will be some time that passes if vehicles fail to yield before the pedestrian can continue moving onto their second step. Place yourself as a recorder in a position away from the crosswalk as to not give a false indication of an intention to cross, but also in a place where you're able to view the movements of the stage pedestrian, the dilemma zone cones, and the yield distance markings or cones. Here's an example of a vehicle yielding. When the stage pedestrian steps into the crosswalk, the recorder starts the stopwatch. You will stop the stopwatch when the stage pedestrian commences the walk across the street after the first vehicle yields. So in other words, that's the time that elapsed between the time that the decoy steps into the street and the time that they start walking to get across the street. In this case, the vehicle is stopped beyond the 40-foot cone. And we'll talk about how the recorder will enter that information. This is an example on this slide of how to fill out the sheet. In that yielding example, a tick mark under lane 2, which again is the center line in the lane closest to the center line in our data collection form. More than 40, the driver stopped in lane 2 more than 40 feet from the crosswalk, and therefore that was how that was entered in this form. And then on the far right is the number of seconds, 8.04, that our pedestrian had to wait before they could start crossing. So in the next few slides, we're going to talk about how to record the information about the crossing. Most fields will have a missing entry because most cars will either pass or stop without incidents. And to orient you about this form, each row is an observation of a stage pedestrian initiating and making a crossing. If the vehicles, and the way we're going to go through this form is I am going to go through the columns and talk about the ones that are highlighted in red. So Carolyn, if we can back up to the slide before this one. The first thing to fill out in this form is the count of how many cars passed after the signal to intent was made, the signal of an intention to cross was made. So if a vehicle makes no attempt to stop, it will be counted as in the cars not yielding. Any subsequent vehicles that do not stop will also be noted with a tick mark in this column by lanes. And we encourage you to count, just use the Roman numeral counting system to enter the data into these lanes. And the next set of columns is the distance of the first yielding car from the crosswalk by lane. Note that only the first car that yields is recorded in each lane, as the cars that stop behind them are not necessarily stopping because they saw the pedestrian, but rather because they didn't intend to hit the car that did stop for the pedestrians. So in the green, we've put some boxes that might be filled out. The car that the first car to stop after 0 or a non-zero number of vehicles past the pedestrian stopped in less than 10 feet in that distance between the cone that is 10 feet from the crosswalk and the crosswalk itself. The vehicle in lane 2 stopped in the distance between the two cones that are 10 and 40 feet. So away from the crosswalk. So if the 10 foot from the crosswalk mark or cone is not visible, how do you know this? How do you know where they stopped? If the 10 foot from the crosswalk mark or cone is not visible because the vehicle has passed it, in other words, they are stopped very close to the crosswalk, score them in the less than 10-foot yielding bin, as is shown in the leftmost green rectangle here. If the 10-foot mark or cone is visible because the vehicle has not passed it, score them in the 10-foot to 40-foot yielding bin. If both the 10-foot and 40-foot cones are visible because the vehicle has not passed either one of them, they stop very far from the pedestrian, score them as more than 40-foot yielding bin. It's a mouthful. On multiple lanes, if a vehicle yields in one lane, but the other vehicles in the same direction of travel in adjacent lanes do not stop, you're going to score them as cars not yielding and make note of each one of them in both the pass bin under the multiple threat conflicts and then tick mark for a car not yielding. And this is a particularly important set of columns because on a multi-lane street because of the multiple threat conflict. On multi-lane roads, if a vehicle yields in one lane and the first yielding vehicle in the same direction of travel in the adjacent lanes have to brake to a hard stop, in other words, they come to a stop, but it's an event, it has to happen abruptly. And you note this by hearing the tire screech or seeing the vehicle nose come down rapidly. Enter where where they yielded in that lane, and in all likelihood, they're in the less than 10 feet from the crosswalk category, and that they had to make a hard brake in order to stop before the pedestrian decoy was able to continue. If a pedestrian, now we're moving on to the column entitled Evasive Action by Lane. If the pedestrian must move themselves out of harm's way to avoid a vehicle, for example, they have to step back out of the road or move quickly forward to avoid the vehicle, then code this as an evasive action for the pedestrian. If a vehicle must swerve to avoid the pedestrian or another yielding vehicle, then code it as an evasive action. And in this case, they could, I have highlighted the all of the columns with the dash green box to the left of the multiple threat conflict columns, because the vehicle could do anything. The vehicle could pass the pedestrian, or they could stop in any distance away from them, and so there would be an entry both in the evasive action lane and in the where they stopped or how they didn't stop columns. If the vehicle, now we're in the trap column, if the vehicles in the opposite lane of travel do not yield so that the pedestrian is forced to stand on the center line with vehicles moving in both lanes of travel, code this event as a trap. This is the last point of observation before the pedestrian continues across the street without the recorder observing how the opposite direction of how people traveling in the opposite direction might yield to the pedestrian or not. The next column is put into place if marked with a tick mark if the stage pedestrian fails to follow the protocol. I know that some examples of this are they don't stop at the lane's edge before proceeding to cross a multi-lane street, or they step into the curb signaling their intent to cross, but they decide for some reason to go back on the sidewalk. Those are two examples of where this data point might be entered. And then finally, remember the recorder started the stopwatch when the pedestrian stepped onto the crosswalk, and they stopped it when the rest of the crossing commenced. There's no need to look at the stopwatch until you finish the recording about the pedestrian and the driver yielding or other not yielding behavior throughout the course of the crossing. But before you go to while the stage pedestrian is returning back to the initiation point of the crossing, take a look down at the crosswalk, record the time that elapsed, and record the time that elapsed. It's going to be the same. It will have been noted many seconds before you finish recording the entry about the full crossing. There are also instructions in our protocol about collecting data for natural pedestrian crossings. In other words, you might be interested in the yield compliance behavior of places with large numbers of pedestrians. All the steps are the same for both for the recorder, but you have some opportunities to note some characteristics of the crossing pedestrians in the wild, let's say, where the stage pedestrian or decoy pedestrian is not the unit for the crossings. You can note things like a platoon of pedestrians should be counted as one crossing because a lot of people are crossing at the same time. If the coder perceives the pedestrian or at least one pedestrian within a platoon to be elderly or a child or using a mobility device, that can be marked on the coding sheet as such. Any vehicles that are inside the dilemma zone when a natural pedestrian steps off the curb can be scored as yielding or not yielding. So again, we'll repeat all the steps as a stage pedestrian crossing and note characteristics. We encourage you to use this natural pedestrian crossing opportunity if it works for you, but some of the limitations, if it's important for you, but some of the limitations are that there'll be some variability. As an example of one example is that pedestrians might step off the curb inside the dilemma zone. And also another reason we recommend using the stage pedestrian methodology is that you can typically get more data points in a shorter amount of time. Ooh, so what do you do after all this data has been collected? We recommend that you collect at least 20 observations of pedestrian crossings. And after the data collection, you'll record the total numbers of each field into the Excel version of the crossing form. So in this example, the recorder has used a Roman numeral letter numbering system in each of the fields, and the fields are mimicked in the data entry form. After data collection, you'll record the total numbers of each field into the Excel version, and the totals are summed in the data summary tab, which is on the next page, next slide. When completed, we would ask similarly that you submit the completed Excel file and scan copies of your hand-recorded data forms via Smartsheets. There on the Excel file, there's an opportunity to insert the diagram of your intersection as well, and tell us some information about the nature of that location. So we've been through a lot, and we have done this work a lot in the field, and I want to convey that it's much easier to do than to talk about. So the other thing that, as a reminder, is that for the most part, the fields that will be in your data are the number of vehicles that pass and the distance of the vehicles that stop. So it's actually a pretty simple exercise, and the extraordinary conditions are very, very rare. So with that, I would ask if there are any questions. I don't see any.
And we're happy to take questions on either the two tools that we discussed today or on the pilot, Counts Plus pilot in general.
Thanks, Tracy.
All right. Oh. Okay,
Thanks,
Derek
Derek.
says, yeah, it looks like a great additional method for getting counts. Thanks for putting this together. Thanks so much, Derek. We hope you find it useful.
And we hope you'll use it.
Yeah. Yeah, no, we'll just add it. It was mentioned during the webinar that materials would be posted on the website, and so expect to have those available for your use within a week or so. The current tools that are posted online that we do have is around partnerships with local organizations. And that was the last webinar we did, so you can look at those now, and also the recording. I guess I have one
Great.
question for the group. I'm kind of curious if anyone is already collecting driver yield, information in your community. If anyone is, I'd love to know and kind of hear how that's going for you all.
Derek, since you provided a comment, we'll call you out and see, ask you if you've collected this type of information before for projects or any city activities.
Sure. I was just getting ready to type, saying it's been a number of years, but I did do yield compliance when we first put in bike boxes in our city, and it was a much less rigorous system. So I think something like this could also be adapted for yield compliance for bike boxes or similar types of infrastructure. That was kind of my first thought when I saw it. Was that something that's systematic really awesome to have. Sorry about background noise.
Did you continue to monitor compliance at the bike boxes, or was it just as a initial installation and data gathering?
Yeah, I think I did approximately 2 to 3 counts over the first 6 months that they were installed. And it was, we did see a increase in compliance over that 6-month period. So it was good to see.
That's great to hear.
And I guess I might ask, are any of you thinking that there are locations that you would like to collect yield compliance data? Or rather, and also thinking about putting this into your toolbox for local data collection inside or outside of the ATP program? Well, we continue to be a resource, and maybe turn it over to you, Tracy, to close us out.
Great. Thank you so much, Drew, and thank you to you and Carolyn for great presentations on these two tools. As you mentioned, the program participation tool is a more straightforward one-star tool in terms of technical difficulty, but the driver yield is a more complex tool, and regardless, both would yield, no pun intended, great information on your projects that are useful to the ATP program and for your future programmatic efforts as well related to active transportation. So in terms of our next steps, thinking about the other tools that we look forward to introducing to you, we hope that you'll save the date for the next webinar, which is scheduled for January 9th. We're going to review 2 additional tools, the user and parent satisfaction, as well as the change in speed data collection tool. In February or March timeframe, we'll cover 3 more data collection tools, and then our last webinar will explain the process to request additional technical assistance, such as the virtual or in-person options that I discussed earlier in the webinar. So with that, I will pass it to, I will say thank you very much for joining us today. Ali, is there anything else that you'd like to say before we sign off? And our contact information is on the screen.
Thank you, Tracy. Yeah, and thank you everyone for joining us today. I think just feel free, like I said earlier on, if you have any questions about this pilot or the work that we're doing with Nelson Niagara, don't hesitate to give us an email, and that's listed here at the bottom of the screen. But yeah, again, I just want to thank you all for spending time with us this afternoon, and I hope you find these tools useful.
Great. Thank you, everyone.